welcome back to my channel, Beautiful Minutia. If you're new here, my name is Tiffany and I'm really excited to be kicking off LM Montgomery today with an original tag. So you've probably already heard me talking up a storm about LM Montgomery, but in case you haven't, I will have all the details linked down below. But it's basically a readathon for the entire month of May to celebrate LM Montgomery and her wonderful, wonderful books. So if you're reading any LM Montgomery books in the month of May, you are participating, but we have lots of really other fun things going on. We have a bingo board, we have a group read, we are going to have some live reading sprints on my channel, we are going to have a live discussion, and we may even do a watch along of an adaptation. So all the details will be linked down below in the description of this video, so that way if you don't know about it, then you can check it out. All of my lovely co-hosts will be linked as well. Dia from Novel Idea, Courtney from Courtney Reads, Chelsea from A Voyage of a Time Wanderer, and Chantel from Chantel Reads All Day. And all of these wonderful ladies were so instrumental in creating this tag. I had the idea that I wanted to do a tag that the questions were based off of all of the LM Montgomery protagonists, like main protagonists in her novels. And there are a lot of these books that I haven't really quite yet read. So it was wonderful to have people in the group who had read these books and were super helpful with the prompts and everything. And we tried to make it a mix of some book recommendation questions and some more conversational questions as well. So I hope that if you're watching this video, that if you would like to do this tag, I would love it if you did. And yeah, so let's dive into the questions. Okay, so we are kicking off with Miss Anne Shirley herself from Anne of Green Gables. So Anne is an orphan who has long wished for a family of her own and a place to belong. Share a book that has a heartwarming found family element. And for this book, maybe it's just because it's really fresh in my mind, but I was thinking of the Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson, so I'm gonna say Way of Kings, because I feel like the whole Bridge Fort arc is for sure found family, and I just love that element. It's actually my favorite element, my favorite thing about the Way of Kings. So Way of Kings is the first book in the Stormlight Archives. It's a really big, really thick fantasy book, but I promise it is definitely accessible for such a high fantasy with so much depth to its world and so many different countries and people groups, and Brandon Sanderson really went all out in all of that, but the characters are the best part of Brandon Sanderson's books. So Kaladin and Bridgeford just totally has my heart and is one of my favorite found family books. The next question is Emily of New Moon. So Emily was the character that LM Montgomery said was the most like herself out of her protagonists. And which literary character do you most identify with? So when it comes to LM Montgomery protagonists, the one that I actually most identify with is also Emily. I really like Emily, and I relate to her more than I relate to Anne, because while I feel like Emily is also a writer and she's super imaginative and all of those things, which I do relate to with Anne, Anne is so much more upbeat and optimistic than Emily is, and she's more effusive in her emotions in general. Emily is a very emotional person, but she tends to not be quite as outward. Anne is very reactionary, and her temper gets her in a lot of trouble sometimes. And Emily is usually much more reserved with those kinds of things. So I definitely, out of the protagonists of the LM Montgomery books I've read so far, Emily's the one that I relate to the most, but I wouldn't say that she's the literary character that I relate to the most out of a lot of the books that I've read. I tend to relate to side characters a lot. So I think that maybe I'm not the main character of my life, which is totally fine. But some of the most iconic, most well-loved classic literature books like Pride and Prejudice and Little Women, I am not a Lizzie Bennet. I am not a Jo March. I am a Meg March and I am a Jane Bennet. So I don't know. I just tend to be more reserved in that way. I'm not feisty. almost ever. I'm never feisty. I'm very non-confrontational for the most part, and just kind of like a little more even, I guess. So I don't know. So I relate most to probably Meg, actually. Meg March from Little Women is probably one of the most that I relate to. The main character that I think I can relate to most as like a teenager is Catherine Morland from Northanger Abbey, because I was Catherine when I was a teenager. I was overanalyzing everything and like had a super overactive imagination in terms of imagining bad things that could happen to me and all of those kinds of things. And my husband is totally the Henry Tilney to my crazy Catherine Morland. So yeah, I've mellowed with the years. I'm definitely much less dramatic and over analytic than I used to be. So I would say that I'm probably more of a Meg March than I am a Catherine Morland at this point. But I'd say those are the literary characters that I can think of off the top of my head that most apply to me. The next question is about Rilla Blythe from Rilla of Ingleside, and Rilla's story takes place during World War I. So what's a major world event that has taken place during your lifetime, and recommend a book that includes that event in some way? So of course, when I think of a major world event happening in my lifetime, the thing that comes to my mind immediately is 9/11. But I actually have never read a book that's centered around 9/11. I know there are some fantastic ones out there, some that have been recommended to me and that I just haven't gotten to yet. But yeah, I haven't read any books surrounding that. I don't know. I very vividly remember that day. I think I was almost 13 when it happened. So it's very vividly ingrained in my mind. And yeah, so I don't have a book recommendation for that though. So I was kind of like looking through other major world events that have happened in my lifetime, and I've never read books about COVID. It's too soon for me. I can't do it yet. And different things like that. So I was looking, and apparently the Berlin Wall came down in 1989, and I was like a baby, but I was technically alive. So the book that I'm going to recommend is not actually one about the Berlin Wall going down though. It's actually about the Berlin Wall going up. And that's A Night Divided by Jennifer A. Nielsen. This is a middle grade historical fiction that is surrounding this time period, and basically this young girl, she lives in Berlin with her family, and her brother and her dad go over to like the other side of Berlin to get something or whatever, and they stay overnight with some family, and when they wake up in the morning, this wall has been constructed. So now her and her other brothers and her mother are on one side of the wall, and then her father and her brother are on the other side. And so their family is separated. So they're seeking ways to get back together, and they're on the side that's under the Iron Curtain's rule and all of that kind of stuff. And then her other family is on the side of freedom. So they're also trying to find a way to be free as well. It was a really interesting book to think of it from that perspective of families literally being divided, with a city literally divided in half. So yeah, that technically I'm really cheating on this prompt, but that's okay. That's my recommendation. The next question is about Kilmeny, who is the protagonist of our group read, Kilmeny of the Orchard. So Kilmeny loves to play the violin. How does music play a role in your life? Playing an instrument, songs that mean a lot to you, etc. So unfortunately, I do not play an instrument. My daughter has taken some piano lessons, and she hasn't for a couple years now. But when she was, I was actually sitting in on her piano lessons, so I was able to help her at home if she got confused, because I had no knowledge of music whatsoever. I couldn't read music. I didn't know anything really about music. And so I purposely sat in on her lessons so that way I would be able to actually help her if she needed help. And so I was occasionally practicing playing at that point, but I didn't practice nearly as much as she did, and I'm not very practiced at all in that. So unfortunately, I do not play an instrument, and I don't really sing. I have sung in church a little bit, but my sisters are the singers, not me. I'd love to sing, but I'm not great at it. I can hold a tune most of the time, but not super talented. So music does still play a pretty big role in my life though, in terms of just we're listening to music most of the time. So I have a lot of songs that have been really meaningful to me over my life and have just helped me get through some really difficult times, especially songs that are centered around my faith and reminding me of God's faithfulness have gotten me through some of the darkest time periods in my life. And so I'm really thankful for music. And if you've been around here for very long, you know that my daughter and I absolutely love K-pop. So we're listening to K-pop all the time. Our favorite bands are probably Twice and BTS and Hypen and ITZY right now, I think are probably like the top bands, but the one that my daughter listens to the most is for sure Twice. And I'm just along for the ride. I'll just listen to whatever she's listening to most of the time. But we're also huge classical music fans as well. So I think the classical composer that we listen to the most is Paganini. We're big Paganini fans. So yeah, so I still would say music still plays a pretty big role in my life, although I am not a musician. It just started raining. So if you can hear rain splatting on the window or wind picking up, sorry about that. The video also might have gotten a little darker. It's looking a little yuck out there and the sun was out earlier, so came on very suddenly. Moving on to Sara from Story Girl. So Sara loves to tell stories to anyone who will listen. Share a short story collection that you love. I actually used to not like short stories at all, because I felt like I just couldn't get as invested in the characters, and so I just wasn't a fan. But I have found some authors that I feel like do short stories really, really well. And so a short story collection that I really love is Everything That Rises Must Converge by Flannery O'Connor. And it seems a bit odd to be recommending Flannery in an LM Montgomery video because they could not be more different. They are not similar at all. But I love the way that Flannery O'Connor just explores human nature and the ugly things about it and the hypocrisy about it, and her social commentary. I feel like it's very, very valuable, but her books are tonally so different from LM Montgomery. They are not sweet or wholesome in any way. They're pretty dark and gritty, but I just love Flannery O'Connor. I would say she's the queen of short stories, to be totally honest. Next, we are talking about Pat from Pat of Silverbush and Mistress Pat, which is a duology, and I haven't read either of these ones yet. But Pat is a homebody, and she loves her home and her family and has no desire to ever leave them. What does home mean to you? And is there a literary home you would love to live in? So home to me means family. And maybe that sounds cheesy, but home is for sure where my family is. The location doesn't matter nearly as much as the people that I'm there with. But I would also say that home for me encapsulates a place that I can be separated from stress or tasks, or I mean, I have tasks at home. I'm a homeschool mom, so definitely. But I mean, outside stressors, that it can be kind of a refuge from things going on in the world that are stressful, or things going on in our lives outside of our home directly that are stressful, that our home can be a place of rest and refuge from those things. And that is a huge element of home for me also. If I'm gonna get down and be picky about like location or things like that, I love living in the country. We just moved to the country in southern Kentucky about 2 years ago, and we live in the middle of nowhere, and I love it so much. It's so peaceful and so quiet, and there's so much nature around us and woods around us and just animals, and it's beautiful, and I love it. And that, if I'm choosing a literary home, that is kind of what I'm looking for, honestly. So the first place that came to mind was Manderley. From Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. But I don't want the housekeeper, and I don't want the dark secrets. I love the description of them going down to like the beach and them going out on picnics and the scenery and the trees around Manderley. And I'm like, oh, I would totally live there, but like not with the people who are there. Like well, that's spoilery. If the ending of the book hadn't taken place and the people who lived there just decided they were gonna sell this place and no one was coming with it, then I would want it. Plus, I feel like big mansions like that, they probably have like amazing, massive libraries. That's something that I'm drawn to as well. So I would also say though, I would for sure live in Bag End in Hobbiton. Like if I could live any fictional place, any fictional fantasy world, I would live in Hobbiton like before the events of Lord of the Rings or after the Return of the King, after the Scourging of the Shire, all that. I would love to live in Bag End. And you know, I know that there would be a lovely garden and lots of nature because that is something that Hobbiton is known for. So I would live there also. I just read The Enchanted April by Elizabeth von Arnim, and San Salvatore sounds like the loveliest place in the world. I would totally live there, and I would love to go to Italy someday. So reading the descriptions in that book were really, really lovely. But again, lovely places aren't good enough if I don't have my family and it doesn't feel like rest and refuge. The next prompt is Valancy from The Blue Castle. Valancy is a character who longs to push past family pressures and expectations and carve out her own path to find happiness. What's a book that inspired you to overcome difficulty in your life? I think a big one for me, even though I just kind of mentioned it a little bit, would be Lord of the Rings. Because Lord of the Rings, there's so much beauty in that book about fighting for what's right and doing the right thing, even when it's really hard, and self-sacrificial love. And I love that about Lord of the Rings. So I think that that is one fiction book that for me is very inspiring, especially Sam. We all need a Samwise Gamgee in our lives, and I want to be someone's Samwise. So anyways, that's a big one for me. I think a book that is a little more recently that I have read that's a nonfiction that was really encouraging for me when I was really, really struggling with kind of my worth in Christ and also just kind of exhaustion in like life in general. I think a really good one for me that I've read recently is Gentle and Lowly by Dane Ortland. And this is basically, I forget exactly what the subtitle says, but it's something along the line of how Jesus's heart is for sinners and sufferers. And to be honest, there was nothing in this book that was revolutionary that I had never heard before, but it just came at the right time. It was like a soothing balm for my soul to remember that Jesus didn't come for us because we're perfect and we have it all together. Like he came because we needed him, and also like just the deep heart of love of Christ for people and the way that he identified with those who are suffering, because he experienced a lot of suffering himself. And so it was just encouragement that I needed at just the right time. Moving on to Jane of Lantern Hill. Jane desperately wants a second chance for her parents, a chance to be part of a family where both of her parents are present. What's a book that you had DNF'd but connected with you when you gave it a second chance? So the book that immediately came to mind is Les Miserables by Victor Hugo. So this is a book that I read about 2 summers ago, and I had started this book 3 times and couldn't get through part 1 any of the times. And so I was like, this is the book I want to conquer. And it was still kind of difficult at the beginning, but as I continued on, I just like adored this book and connected with it so deeply. There were so many things about it that I love, and it hasn't even been that long since I've read it, and I'm already like, I want to read that again sometime soonish because I connected with it on such a deep level. The next is Marigold from Magic for Marigold. And Marigold is one of the few Montgomery protagonists who we only experience in childhood. She's very imaginative and loves the outdoors. What were some of your favorite things to do as a child? And if you had a favorite childhood book that fed your imagination, please share that as well. So one thing that has not changed in my life is my love of reading. I actually started reading before I went to kindergarten because my parents read to me so much that I started picking up reading before I actually had any sort of formal education at all. So I have always loved reading. I've always loved being read to and then reading myself. So my nose was always in a book as a child. And it's really funny because I talk all the time about, my daughter has done sports over the past year and tried them for the first time. And I say that any athleticism she did not get from me because my husband was playing sports constantly, like his whole life. He would play multiple sports every year, like his whole life. And I think he played almost every sport. He may not have played baseball, but he definitely played every other sport that he could, including like martial arts and all kinds of different stuff. And I always joke and say that my sport was reading. Because that was what I was doing. I was always reading as a child, or I was outside, and I was a super imaginative child. So I really relate to like the younger versions of Anne and Emily from LM Montgomery's works, and just being super imaginative and naming things and doing things like, yeah, I can see all of that there. And my imagination was definitely fed by books, but also by movies as well. My parents were kind of cautious about certain things that I watched because I would play act literally anything that I saw. Anything. And so they were like, if we don't want her acting like that, we should probably wait to let her watch that till she's a little older. And I'm like, good call, Mom and Dad, good call. So anyway, some books that really, really inspired my imagination when I was a child. I would say the biggest one was The Boxcar Children by, I think, is it Gertrude Warner? I'm trying to remember if that's correct or not. I'm not sure. But that, oh my goodness, I played that with my little sister all the time. That was like one of our favorite things to play. We'd play it outside, and we had like old fashioned like real clotheslines, and so we'd hang stuff up and make tents and stuff, and we loved to pretend that we were like Native Americans too. That was not really from a book though, I don't know where that came from, but our favorite thing was like coming up with like really cool names, like Sunset Over Water, or like we loved to just pretend that we were like anything that involved us like being outside and like living off the land on our own were things that we loved to play. And so the Little House on the Prairie books were pretty instrumental in that as well. I especially loved On the Banks of Plum Creek because they lived in a dugout in that book. I just talked about that in some video recently. Oh, in my Buzzwordathon recommendations video, I talked about On the Banks of Plum Creek, and that's like was my favorite as a child, like just imagining living in a dugout. And now as an adult, I'm like, I would hate that. No, thank you. I can't believe as a child I never read My Side of the Mountain. I feel like that book would have just completely been everything that I ever wanted. And Claire and I have been reading some more survival type books lately. Like we read Robinson Crusoe and certain books like that like have to do with like survival, and immediately it fuels her imagination and has her pretending what she would be doing in that same situation. And so I think that that's something that like all kids seem to really love, is just what would you do if you were in the wilderness all on your own and pretending and surviving. And we wouldn't have survived in real life, but it was really fun to pretend. And the last question has to do with A Tangled Web. Aunt Becky is the matriarch of the Penhallow Dark family, who causes quite a stir over who she will leave her prized heirloom jug to. Tell us about a book you have read that has a lot of family drama. And the book that immediately comes to mind is Dostoevsky's The Idiot. I remember reading this book. It was like right around the time that I started my channel that I read The Idiot. And I was like, this is top tier family drama. Like, whoa. Oh my goodness. And Demons had a lot of drama. I recently read that one, but I feel like The Idiot, the first part of The Idiot passes Demons in terms of like the first part. It's like so intense, the family drama, that I described it to a friend as like Dostoevsky wrote like Real Housewives. Like this is like the Real Housewives of St. Petersburg. Like it's crazy some of the stuff that they do and some of the things that go on. Really that whole book, but that first part is just like you're sitting there like eating popcorn like what is going on here? The drama is crazy. I feel like it is probably one of the most like family drama heavy books I've ever read. And the last question is to tag some LM Montgomery lovers. So I have a big list of people that I'm going to tag. Whenever you do this video, you do not need to tag quite as many. I'm just excited because it's an original tag, so I'm tagging a ton of people. So I'm going to tag Stephanie from Miss Richards Reads, and Amy of Hearth Ridge, Krista from Books and Jams, Kelly from Cozy Reader Kelly, Kellyanne Mitchell, Kate Howe, Miriam Elizabeth Reads, Naomi from Naomi's Bookshelf, Rainy Day Reads, Whitney Drew, and Janelle from Too Fond of Books. So I hope that all of you do this tag. I would love to hear your answers as well. And if you were not tagged in this tag and you would love to do it, please do so and participate in LM Montgomery May in that way. And also, if you don't have a channel, feel free to answer some of these questions below, and I would love to hear your answers. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please hit like and also subscribe so you can continue to see more bookish content from me, and I will see you again next time.